Fedora.Next discussion, we're focusing on this release, basically, rather than next release, because we like to do things in awesome orders here in Fedora. So I'm going to go through a abridged version of my general Fedora.Next talk, which people have probably seen some version of before. And then we're going to have everybody from the working groups, the representatives from each one, give a little 3-minute spiel on their area in Fedora, and then we will do a QA panel discussion there. And actually, I will mostly sit down for that and let those people do the panel discussion. So, I always like to start with this. Fedora is awesome. I talk a lot about how we want to do things differently and how we need to change going forward. We've done, but those changes are basically reactive to things that are happening in the world. It's not like we're doing anything wrong, and in fact, we're doing a lot of things right, and hey look, my image doesn't load. Oh, nice.
The lag is behind you.
Great.
Wi-Fi LTE.
I can't type under pressure.
No, don't
You can do it.
do guard the keyboard while you do this.
Yeah, right.
Paper
Yes, I do.
Paper please.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So I'm giving a talk at LinuxCon coming up, and in their call for papers, these were the suggested topics. This is what at a Linux-focused conference people want you to talk about. Nowhere in there is, hey, talk about your Linux distribution. And at his talk, Christoph was talking about going to conferences and the experience of running a Linux distribution booth there, and it's basically boring to do that because people are not very interested in the Linux distribution booth. When we even had on Red Hat Summit, when we had a Fedora booth that was away from the main conference hall, it wasn't really a draw. Fedora is, but when we had Fedora in with everything else, we had a lot of people going by saying, hey, Fedora is awesome, I love you guys, but nobody stopping really to engage a lot. So for whatever reason, which we can talk about a little bit, the actual Linux distributions aren't really what are exciting to people. And this is a change from when I started with Fedora a decade ago. When we were really building distributions was kind of a draw to people, and a lot of us got involved at that time. I'm sure we've attracted more people since then, but the draw is different than it used to be. So part of that is that we've actually solved the problem. This is one of the big reasons. Now that doesn't mean that the problem is completely solved, but it used to be that software was a mess, and there was all these different things out there, and the distributions did a great job of taking the software that was out there, packaging it up, polishing it, putting it together so you had all of these things in a nice place that was very sysadmin friendly. And it was a blessing to sysadmins to have good distributions that had all the packages put together nicely, and so there's a lot of interest in doing that and working on that and solving those problems. We have basically gotten to that state where it feels pretty good. And now, anybody doing software development knows that the last 10% is 90% of the work. So we are still in a phase where there's probably 90% of the work to do, but that, wow, this is exciting part of the first 90%, 90% is good enough for a lot of people. So people are like, okay, we got the 90%, awesome, let's look at the other interesting things. So, meanwhile in the world, there's a huge open source development community going on, completely oblivious to what's going on in the distributions. There's 10 million repos in GitHub. In Fedora, we've got 15,000 packages. So even if 10 million repos, maybe it's not all software repos, maybe most of it's crap, maybe 99.99% of it is crap, but that's still a huge, huge number that's much bigger than the amount of software we've managed to package in Fedora. And there's no way we can package a fraction of that with our RPM into RPMs. It's just not going to happen. The base OS is boring. And because we've gotten to that 90% point, the reward balance has changed for getting into the distro. Before, getting into that polished state was a big reward for someone who had software. Now, so two things have happened. We've gotten to that better state where it's 90% done. It's pretty good. And then also, other things like GitHub have emerged where there are other ways to get your software to people that seem easier and faster. They've got their downsides, but they've got their upsides as well, and we're not playing with that. And the important part of this is that it's not just us. If you look at other Linux distributions, you see the same pattern. So it's not just that Fedora has gone downhill and everybody's jumped ship to something else. This is actually from Google Trends for searches for Fedora. So this doesn't represent Fedora users or how much people care about us, but it represents how much people are looking for us, what's the interest in. You can see that, you can't read the dates there, but it starts over here in 2004 or so, when Fedora started basically, and then goes up here, and then you start high, and then it just kind of goes down, and it basically, although it's a little bit of a downward trend, which is concerning, it kind of flatlines more than falls off the cliff. So it's not like we're going boom and then zero, but it's kind of down to this, there's baseline interest, and it's kind of coasting along there. And if we look at all the other Linux distributions, you can guess who the big spiky line here. This isn't all the other, but it's, a lot of the popular distributions. And in the longer version of the talk, I analyze this a little bit more. But so that big spiky one there is Ubuntu, and that's their releases there. But you can even see that their trend is downward as well. They had a peak of popularity, maybe 6 years ago, and it is down for them as well. And they're still managed to keep that interest pretty high, which is good for them. But it's still part of this overall trend of distributions not being so exciting. So what are we doing about it? Again, I hope everybody here knows all this already, so this is a summary, and we're going to talk about it more. This is from my proposal from Flock last year, and it's not exactly how things are coming out, but this is basically the proposal I put together, where we build Fedora. You can barely see that. Maybe your eyes are better adapted than I am. But we basically had the idea of having different policy rings for Fedora. It's not necessarily the distro is constructed this way, although it would be kind of cool if we can get to the point where we do it that way, where we've got these minimal, this core base OS, and core, of course, is a difficult word. I put Fedora core there anyways. And I think it's really important to emphasize to the Fedora community that when we say this, we are not going back to a Fedora core that's built by a secret inside Red Hat group and then thrown into the wall, and everybody else only gets to touch the outside. In fact, this is something that's community from the bottom up, and so we're probably actually going to avoid saying Fedora core. And for my talk at LinuxCon, I will change it so it doesn't say Fedora core on there anymore. But that's what I said in the proposal last year. So we'll talk more about these things in the panel discussion as well. The basic reason for separating things that way, we can have innovation on the fringes where this interesting stuff is happening and have more careful change management at the base. It doesn't mean we don't need the base to change. In fact, there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on there with systemd and OS tree are really important changes that are happening to the base, but we need to manage that very carefully and in a controlled way so that we don't break everything while we're making major change. And so we talked earlier, the FESCO discussion, one of the conversations was, could we have different release cycles? The answer is, unless we separate these things like this, there's no way we can do it. It's certainly not possible now. But having this separation might make it possible in the future to have different release cycles for the server, workstation, cloud. And it might let us have language stacks, for example, that go at different speeds. So we need to work on those kind of things because that's something people really want. The other thing is it makes it easier to be part of the Fedora project without necessarily getting yourself packaged up to the high standards that we hold things to in Fedora. And particularly lets us focus where it matters rather than giving everything the same level of attention no matter what it is. We can give it the attention that it needs to have to solve the problem we're trying to solve at the time. Okay, so the other part of what we put into the Fedora.Next umbrella is this proposal that was also fought last year from Stephen Gallagher to have 3 products. So it's kind of the previous one is here's the policy of organization, and here's what we're going to do with it. And so these are the beautiful logos from our Fedora design team, a lot of back and forth work, especially Mo Duffy came up with the final versions here. So these are our 3 different products, the server, workstation, and cloud, and they're pretty little logos, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in the panel. And so the basic reason for these distinctions, it gives a voice for the server, whereas in Fedora before, we've had a lot of, Fedora traditionally comes from a sysadmin base who were working on Red Hat Linux. And so we have a lot of sysadmins, let's try with a lot of sysadmins here. And as Fedora has become kind of focused on being a desktop distribution, it became hard to have that right conversation. And also by splitting it out, it lets the Workstation have a certain user focus, and again, the Workstation panel will talk about that a little bit more. We've chosen developer focus for that. And it also lets the cloud, which is an area where we don't have a lot of use in Fedora, even though we've got a perfectly awesome, I have to say, I worked on it myself, cloud image. It's not really as used as it could be, and people's default choice in the cloud is usually some other platform. That's concerning for us, and if it's not concerning to you, you can talk to me and I'll tell you why you should be worried. But it lets us do more radical things in that without messing up the rest of the distribution, and we need to do those radical changes in order to be something that's exciting and appealing in that space. This is from a presentation I gave before, and I'm going to repeat it. This is from DevConf. Basically, our traditional approach has been to, here's a bunch of Lego bricks. We've made them to high tolerances. They're polished. They're beautiful. And so some of the fear is that with these products, we're saying, here's your Playmobil state sets. And I don't know if anybody who has kids maybe knows this distinction. You get the pile of Lego blocks, and you can build anything you want with it, but you can't really start playing with it right away. If you have the Playmobil, you take it out of the box, and you've got your castle made. You can put the knight on the castle and on a horse, and then you can ride around, and you get right into playing right away. And so if you get the traditional Fedora distribution, you get it out of the box, and basically if you want to do something with it, it's up to you to build that. And we give you all the blocks, you can do everything you want, but it doesn't come as a built thing. So the idea here is not to take away your Lego blocks, but to ship some of them in sets. So we've got your spaceship is there as a pre-assembled set, and maybe we will even actually ship it to you as a not like a Lego set with instructions, but actually a pre-assembled spaceship ready to fly. But that doesn't mean we'll be taking away the bricks. So again, a little bit of the why. I'm going to grow the user base in the areas we're targeting with these products. We want to make it an easier development target. So if people say, I want to do something for Fedora, I want to use Fedora for this, they know what they're targeting. And another important thing is that our server release can be more connected to future RHEL. This is an important thing for Red Hat, who's obviously a big stakeholder in Fedora. We want to make sure that there's a place for things. There was a big conversation a couple releases ago about LVM and what place that has in Fedora, and the argument that it isn't a good desktop technology can be made, but we need to have a place in Fedora where there are users, real users, for whom that is important technology, and so this gives a place where we can market to that. So,
Mr. was trying to tell us the other day that Fedora.Next has nothing to do with Red Hat, and now you say that the exact opposite.
So the question is, someone is saying Fedora.Next has nothing to do with Red Hat, and now I'm saying the exact opposite. Fedora.Next is not pushed on us by Red Hat, but Red Hat is, again, one of our major stakeholders. Having Fedora be useful to Red Hat is important to us, and this is a way that we can do that is also useful to Fedora users. I don't think there's a conflict there. It's a way that Red Hat, as part of the community, is working with things that we need, and I think that this will be also very beneficial to a lot of people who are using Fedora. Does that help that at least? So yeah, I think it has nothing to do with Red Hat. It's not quite the right answer, but it's not something Red Hat says we have to do. So that is my talking fast version of the presentation, and now I'm going to step aside and we will have these lovely people whose names I hope I got all right go on to talk about their different parts of things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, except if you want to start, Stephen, but I mean, as I'm the representative for the base working group, which has not been mentioned by Matthew, which is really nice. Yeah, that was the core, I know. So we might call it Fedora base in the slides later on. Maybe that's better. I had my name of Fedora Heart at some point. Oh, nice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm the representative for the Fedora base working group, and we've been focused on looking at how we can basically build a foundation for all the 3 products that we're planning on right now, and also for other future products. Because, I mean, although we now have quote-unquote just server, workstation, and cloud, there's no reason why in the future there should not be maybe any other products, potentially. There's no concrete plans right now, but it's all open, right? I mean, we're not static. That's the important part. That's also why we're doing this right now. And so the core group, the base group, was basically focused now on looking at what do we need to provide up into the stack for the other platforms and the other products to actually be able to do their work and to deliver their products. And where the common technologies are, where the common frameworks are, and all these things. And one of our focus areas was to make this base OS, basically, the base platform, as small as possible. So that anybody who wants to build upon this, even maybe embedded people that want to do a SIG with embedded that want to do really a very minimal thing, or even Docker things, for example, Docker images that need to be as small as possible, can actually really consume that and use that. So that's one of our main focuses, and we've initially now had a definition of, I think, 130 packages at the start that define how base was looking. And we're trying to reduce that still. I mean, we're still looking at that. The second thing that we wanted to have there, though, was that it is self-building, so a self-hosting system. And that's where we actually ran into a problem, because when we try to actually build those 130 packages, you end up with 1,800 packages, which is really just mind-blowingly stupid. That's just not, that can't be right. So we're currently working on, and I have a guy who's actually right now writing software to identify where you can draw build requirements, for example, and just files bugs, and works with the maintainers then to get those fixed, to just reduce that. And our goal is definitely to get way below 1,000. I mean, way below 1,000 for those build requirements. And a couple of other things that we did. I mean, we've looked at Docker now. Docker. Every good talk has the Docker in it. So we now have 2 folks actually also in the working group that are really focusing their work on Docker, because it's a shared technology also between all the different products too. And working on that, getting that done with resource management. And we've been in touch with all the working groups every couple of weeks or maybe once a month to just see if they have any things that we need to do, or that we need to look at, or that they want us to look at. Best example right now is the OS product thing, for example, that we're looking at, or the Docker thing as well. But when things come up, also for release management, for example, where Dennis is involved a lot in these things, we have to adapt things in the release management things and what we need to deliver there, and what products actually then get information from us, what they need to actually do, like start files. It's a very good example of that we just still need in the current infrastructure. But how that evolves, we'll see. I mean, this is all, in flux. We're still working on it. We're still working on the details and everything. So things are going forward, and I'm really excited. So I'm handing it over to Stephen Nash.
When we do environments and stacks next.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
So we're going a little far. Sorry?
Sure.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Hello, I'm Honza Horák. I'm a member of the Environment and Stacks group. And first I would like to invite you to the next talk after lunch, which will be dedicated to Environment and Stacks. So you will learn much more. So this will be just a quick introduction or invitation. We had a little problems to define where we actually fit into Fedora project, because we should probably be in the edge somehow, but also another products like server, cloud, and workstation should actually be, should actually use some of our products or some of our systems, and we should just serve for them. So it was a bit different to define, but I would like to just summarize with our some kind of vision that we just would like to make Fedora a great platform for developers, and in any language or application stack, which quite handy describes what we would like to achieve. And when we talk about developers, it's that they are both users and also contributors. So we are focusing on both groups of these developers. So just to summarize quickly what we looked into in the last half year, or I'm not sure how long, it were build systems, like especially Copper, because in Koji it's not so simple to make any big changes, so we focused mostly on Copper, and also there were some nice changes in Mock, which is base for Mock, for Koji and Copper itself. So the build system is one part, and from that originated the idea with the playground repo, which is based on Copper, and which should actually be the platform or the medium for delivering packages that simply cannot be in the base platform, in the Fedora core, or how we call it. So these packages in that repo should definitely be legal, okay, but well, like they said, they can break some rules that we need to follow in the Fedora proper. So another thing were software collections. That's really hard topic. We achieved something, but we didn't achieve other things. So software collections are not part of the Fedora yet, officially. But we need to make bigger progress in that part, and we really want to continue to somehow get them into Fedora. Then there was discussions about documentation, which currently isn't perfect. We know, we all know that, and also there was a great project, or the great project is has been developed by Slavik Kabrda, right, and his team. It's called Development Assistant, and it should really be a great tool for developers, both for developers of Fedora and developers of system on top of Fedora. And yeah, and there was last topic, yeah, automation. Like again, you all know that we do pretty much too much stuff manually and by hand. So this is also a great topic, well, really big topic. We need to automate things. Yeah, I guess that could be all.
Hello, I'm Haïkel. I'm known as number 80 on the IC. I'm the representative of the Cloud Working Group. The Cloud Working Group is the group in charge of maintaining the cloud images and also delivering them to the main cloud providers. If we have to define it, I'd say we are the kind of the weird kid in all the products, because this is a place where there are one of the most disruptive changes, in my opinion. For instance, we are still delivering an image as usual, like all the other products, but we also have a new way of delivering images that is uploading them directly to the provider. Be it go to Amazon, Rackspace, not yet, but soon in the future, or use the Docker index to retrieve Fedora. So we have to adapt our build systems. So one of the most important tasks we had was to build the tools that integrates well in our build system, so we could push up and to upload automatically these images to where are our users. And another part of the job was, well, in the cloud side, we always had a very strong cloud SIG, so it didn't change much in our daily work. But having a working group brought the kind of product vision that was lacking in Fedora. We had many people, technical people, non-technical people on board, so we could share our thoughts and help the technical people who are actually doing things to get it right. And I think in that part we have succeeded. Well, all deliverables are cloud images adapted for various uses, be it hosting, Docker, and this is a huge part because one of the most disruptive things in Fedora 21 would be Fedora Atomic. Fedora Atomic is kind of a new way to manage your applications. It doesn't use you, so when you install Fedora Atomic, you don't get you to deploy application. You have to use host-tree, which is technology which came from GNOME, and also use Docker. This is a kind of new paradigm, so try it and give us our feedback. They are welcome. And also, one of the most important things at community member is that it brought more tighter relationship with other groups. We had to discuss with the server group because we had to support the adopt your cattle. If you are familiar with cloud computing, we have this metaphor of cattle versus pet. So the cattle is an image you use as stock and you don't care if it dies. And the pet is kind of your usual server you use daily and you take care of it, and if you lose it, you lose big. And we had to work with the server group. We work also with the stack group because we provide a very, very minimal images. And people, if they want to deploy in stack, they have to use the word on the and stack group. And to reduce the size of the images, that has involved working tightly with the base image group because, well, we have to reduce the kernel, we had to fix up dependencies, and also another part of the job was taking care of very critical component in cloud computing, like Cloud-init, which is used to initialize your cloud instance at the beginning, because when you take the base image, there is no users, there is one user but no password, so you have to be able at startup to retrieve your SSH key to set it up so you could SSH it. You have to be able to install packages at startup and do it automatically. So this is a kind of interesting because the only one working group who didn't have much ties are the Workstation because, well, it's not much used in the cloud computing, but I think in the future we might have some things happening in that side. So I'm very looking forward. And well, this is my personal point of view. I'd like to invite you to join us. Our functionment is very simple. We have weekly meetings. Everyone is open. The working group is only here to supervise that deadlines are met or not, and trying to help doing things. So I'd like to congratulate the hard work done by the Cloud SIG. They are awesome, and I want to put it forward. And if you have questions, feel free to ask me.
Hi, my name is Gallagher. I'm representing the server working group today. Just as a quick show of hands, how many of you came to the session I ran on it yesterday? I promise to be shorter this time.
Are you done?
So, as Matthew mentioned before, we wanted to build something out of Fedora that provided a voice to the server community that had, for the last few years, kind of been I've talked to a number of people. I know someone commented in I think Christoph's talk the other day, and I don't remember who it was, that no admins use Fedora, none of them use that, and that's not true. In fact, and I'm not allowed to say their names, but I know three Wall Street major companies that I've talked to on a regular basis that are using Fedora as a platform for a lot of their trading stuff, because some of the more stable OSs are just too old to run the stuff they want to do. So there are actually a lot of people out there using Fedora and using it for real world deployments, but they haven't really felt welcome on the developers. They haven't felt like there's a place for them, because it's been there's been a very concerted focus towards the desktop and towards some of the other sexier technologies, the things that hobbyists would discover. So I wanted to kind of change that impression. I wanted when somebody came up and said, "I'm having a real problem running WordPress on Fedora," have it not be the first response on the mailing list is, "Well, you should try running it on CentOS," or "You should try running it on RHEL," because that's not what they want. What they want, and that's not what we want. We want them to be using Fedora in whatever way possible, and increasing our reach and increasing our ecosystem. So I proposed the three products plan, at least in large part self-serving, to get a server distribution out there, get us something that we can tell people, yes, Fedora is for servers. Here's the distribution for it. So what we did was we founded the server working group, and we created a product plan that was based around being, again, like Haïkel said, the pets side of the pets versus cat metaphor. We want to run those machines that you care for and you feed and you make sure that they never get sick. We want to be the domain controllers in your environment, the database servers. We want to be the DNS servers, and possibly the routers. So these are the things that we've been working on for the last 9 months, effectively, and we've made quite a bit of progress. We've got 3 new technologies in Fedora as a direct result of this that, to greater or lesser degrees, are exciting people. We've got RollKit, which is our new offering to do essentially push-button deployment of core system infrastructure services, like I said, the domain controller and the database server. And then we've been working with a team called the Cockpit Project, which was started as a hobbyist project out of the GNOME project, but it turned into a really powerful and really easy to use web-based server manager. And so we're putting that forward as a major visible piece of what we are accomplishing. Yesterday I gave a demo which was reasonably well received, despite some technical issues. And I think that Fedora users are going to have a chance to come back and say, "Hey, that's neat. Give that a try. Let's see how that works in our environment." And then the last piece of it, of course, is something a little more targeted towards those larger environments, which is OpenLMI, and it's meant to be a mechanism for managing a large number of systems at the same time with a remote interface. It fits in, in interesting places with Puppet and Ansible, but it also allows cross-system interoperability with some of the stuff that our competitors are doing. So it'll allow Fedora to sit into heterogeneous environments much better. So all in all, I would say that for the last 9 months, we have come a long way, and we've come up with some really cool stuff for the server, and I'm really excited to see how it plays once we actually get the alphas and the betas out. I really want to see how the media treats it. I want to see how our download count looks, and I want to see those server administrators coming back and talking to us again. Hey, we remember you're there. We never really stopped caring about you. We just lost our way a bit.
Hello everybody, my name is Kalev Lember, and I'm here to talk a few words about Workstation. I don't know about you, but I'm really, really hungry, so I tried to keep it short. Well, almost. we have all those new exciting new products in Fedora. We have server and we have cloud, and then we have workstation. So cloud and server are really exciting and new things, but in workstation we have tried to be conservative. This is mostly a continuation of the old Fedora as we know it. It's the graphical interface. It's the face that the end users are supposed to see, and that's the way we would like to see it continue. That workstation is the entry to Fedora, and over the past few years we've done a bunch of radical changes. We've introduced new GNOME shell and a lot of changes to applications, but I feel that we have reached a point where we have already finished the big changes in applications, and now it's time to actually start finishing up the last, I don't know, maybe 10 or 5% of the things that applications are still missing, and also focusing on bugs much more. So we really would like to be the stable, boring part of Fedora that everybody can trust. And that's basically what Workstation is doing. I promised to be short, so... Oh, and one more thing. I know there's a lot of media here, and if you do take one thing away from my short speech, then there's been talk that the workstation is for developers, and that is partially true. We as the workstation working group are really focusing our efforts right now to make the story better for developers, but that does not at all mean that we are dropping support for regular users, not at all. So everybody is very welcome to use workstation, but our own efforts are our own resources are limited. So we are currently concentrated on making the story better for developers. But still, it's for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so hungry or not, but we're going to do a Q&A. You have to answer questions.
You're not getting away so easy.
Ian.
So CentOS has been mentioned a few times, and I was very excited to see that CentOS has become more integral with Red Hat. And I suppose this is mostly on the server side, but it could be in other places. What effort is put to work more closely with the CentOS group?
Is this one working? Okay, good. Actually, well, I talked about this a little bit in my session yesterday, but we're working fairly closely with some of the community members in CentOS. Specifically, they have a special interest group over there called the Simple Linux Server. And when I think it was Matthew that pointed me to them, what we realized, it's feeding back. Thanks. Okay. When we heard about them, we invited them to come to some of our server-sig meetings. Basically, they were trying to do something very similar to what we're doing in RollKit. So we've started, and we haven't gotten as far as I would like with that partnership yet. But we are going to be working together specifically to build that out, and then hopefully in the near future, backport it to RHEL and CentOS 7, so that they'll be able to take care of that. So yeah, we're definitely trying to engage as much as possible with the CentOS community. Yeah, we're definitely trying to engage as best we can with the CentOS community, and I am certainly open to working with them in any way possible. This thing is very inconsistent.
Just turn it around, maybe.
Okay.
Like this way.
Yeah. All right. I lost my train of thought, of course. I think there's I want to get a lot of feedback, particularly from CentOS users, because of course they are still a downstream. They're downstream in most cases through RHEL, but frankly, anything that a CentOS user is trying to do, there's a good chance that some RHEL or some scientific Linux user is going to want to do the same thing. So it's important feedback. Did that answer your question?
Yep. As with RHEL users, CentOS users are stakeholders in Fedora, and what we do at affects them. So we would like to make that conversation be a conversation rather than a really disconnected thing, which has been the case in the past. So Red Hat's new relationship with CentOS kind of opens up that conversation. We haven't necessarily done anything with it yet, and but we have the opportunity now. I think that's a good thing.
I also forgot to mention one thing. When we originally formed the working groups to produce the products, we appointed a FESCO representative who then selected the initial set of working group members. On that working group, the initial working group, the one that put together the PRD and the technical spec, was Jim Perrin, who was a core CentOS developer. So he was involved. So CentOS has been involved with the Fedora server since the very beginning.
Another important CentOS connection is, of course, a lot of us work on Apple, which is the extra packages for enterprise Linux. And if we measure Fedora's success by downloads and by the amount of bandwidth consumed by it, that dwarfs everything else we do in Fedora. That's not the only way to measure it, thank goodness, but that is really an important thing that Fedora does, where we have a really close connection already, and that's something we can do as well. Langdon.
It's an easy one. You may have mentioned this before, but what's the reasoning for base to be self-hosted?
So Langdon asks what the reasoning is for base to be self-hosted, and then we fill into that one.
So we've been discussing that actually for quite a while, even when we were brainstorming about it. So there's the mic. Interesting. And the reason for that is that we would have to otherwise either have the actual build infrastructure in some other working group or in a product of Fedora. And that is, at least from our point, that was kind of illogical, because you suddenly have a base that is supposed to be consumed and used by other products, which then create the base. Wait, what? Typical what moment. So, and there are reasons obviously against this. I mean, why would base have to be self-hosted? We don't even make a product out of base. I mean, base will not be a product itself. It will be installable because it will be kind of treated like everything else. We have a Kickstart file, we will have an install tree and everything, but it will not be officially called a product. But you will be able to install it and use it and consume it. And so that was our reasoning behind it, because you need to have the development tooling somewhere, right? I mean, it just doesn't appear out of thin air, unfortunately. It would be great if it did, but it doesn't.
You don't want to have Qt and KDE or X11 to build the kernel.
Right, exactly.
On that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the reasons also, and that's what it leads us now to, we right now have, I mean, one of the really funny stories about these 1800 packages is that the kernel currently needs X11 and I think even GTK to build, which is insanity. And that needs the tools to then build the kernel again. And so it's just a huge mess, and we want one space where we can break this, sorry for this word, this shit, because it's shit to do that. And if we put the whole development tools then somewhere else, then we will never ever realize that we actually have this huge mess of stuff lying around. I mean, I'm coming personally also from a little bit of a different field as well, because I'm leading all our, or most of our secondary Arch efforts in Fedora as well. And we've had, and I mean, IBM can attest to that, we've had lots of fun bootstrapping things with 1800 packages that cross-depend on each other for a new architecture. So that's one of the other reasons. And I mean, we can all say as much as we want that we don't do another bootstrap in the next years in Fedora. Been there, done that, thought it, didn't get a t-shirt. So let's not assume we don't get another architecture in the next 5 years. Maybe ARH 128 or x86 128, who knows? Or Google's Power, right? I mean, there's so many things. And we've 2 minutes over, so Food. We're scheduled. What? Since when?
There's alternate versions of the schedule, with some of which say that we can stay here, keep talking, and some of them say that we have to go get food right now.
Okay, that merits more questions.
Yeah, let's take a question from Peter, and then if people want to stay and keep talking, I can do that, but we can also, whatever. Go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to sort of backfill up, having done 2 ARM builds in the last bring-ups in the last couple of years, and aware of at least one new architecture that's looking to bootstrap on Fedora. It makes it much easier to be able to, and there's a lot of really esoteric language bindings in there that, you know, mono and various other bits and pieces that, you know, it just makes secondary arch maintainers' lives, or people that aspire to be secondary arches' lives, much easier. And ultimately, you know, the more people using Fedora, it doesn't matter the arch, and whether it's primary or secondary, the better.
So the comment is from someone who's done a lot with secondary architectures and is working on a new one, that it really makes a big difference to have that small core in it, self-contained. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, one last point about that too, and this is just me thinking also broadly out of the scope of Fedora too. Imagine someone wants to make a complete spin-off of Fedora, and like wants to do something completely different with Fedora that they can't do in Fedora and need to completely bring up their own system or their own OS and infrastructure. Having that being that easier makes it just easier to do that.
I would like to interject that if anyone is thinking of doing that, please talk to us first.
Yes, obviously.
It is, in general, it is not a great idea to go off and spin off your own clone infrastructure unless you have a really good reason.
Yeah, because it's not just about RPM build -- rebuild, by the way. There's a little bit more work to do with this track to get that done.
Okay, so yeah, it is noon now. We do have until 2 till the next sessions start. Is that still the case with the schedule? So I'm willing to keep going here, but if anybody wants to leave and start eating now, I will not be offended at all. So. But I don't know if we have another opportunity to do this discussion, so if you have questions, I'm happy to keep going. In the back.
I probably missed it. Somebody mentioned mono. Without comments about mono particularly. There are like these huge chunks of the universe, or like mono, Java, Node.js. Are these in the stacks, or what do they do? It's not base, it's not server, it's not workstation.
So yeah, the question is, where do huge chunks of language stacks belong? Mono, Java, Ruby, those kind of things. And
Docker containers.
Docker containers. They belong in Docker containers, maybe? Yeah, so I think the answer is that's what the environment stacks is focused on.
Can you ask people to...
Yeah, so we'll pause for about 5 minutes while we let the hungry people leave. Yeah, you can't leave. Actually, I've got an energy bar here, but
Well, actually, you made my point for me, Phil, which is that, you know, the non-obvious piece of self-hosting is repeatability and transparency, and that is our ultimate goal. Is that we never put, we don't want to blockade anybody from spinning off their own fork if that's what they want to do. And the idea that somebody who brings up their own hardware arch that they're working on in secret, they ought to be able to use Fedora to do that simplicity. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Right. And we should, and the barriers to that should be as low as possible.
self-hosting, and Paul thankfully mentioned that why he does things as self-hosting.
Matthew, can you just add, if people are leaving, have them leave, and if they're not, to be quiet?
Yeah, okay. So if you're leaving, get out of here. If you're staying, please be quiet and straight. And actually, if you're in the back row and staying, it'd be awesome if you come back down, come closer. You're welcome. I see you up there.
So, yeah, I mean, Paul was making the point that that the self-hosting is also really the reproducibility and the transparency of Fedora. That we show everyone how we actually build our stuff and make it for them easily consumable as well. And this is really one of the key factors here, that we are not proprietarians in Fedora. We don't want to be, we never wanted to be, and we never will be that, because that's the whole idea behind it, that we are embracing the open source concept in Fedora fully. And that also means that we are giving everybody the freedom, one of the key foundations of Fedora, to actually embrace Fedora in any form or fashion that they think is good for them. And if that means they want to do a rebuild, I mean, taking into account that they should come to us first and talk about it and ask us.
Red Hat should ever decide to abandon the project, someone else could pick it up.
Exactly, that's another good point. Yeah, that was a good point from Stephen as well, that if Red Hat ever decided that we don't want to do Fedora anymore, then somebody else, if we now do the preparation for this, make it easy for them to pick it up and basically continue the work on it. So that's really the key part here.
Speaking for CentOS people, that's one of the things I know they'll really appreciate, because you basically, they rebootstrap the distribution every time there's a new rel release, and it's always a puzzle to figure out how things were actually built, what happened in the secret sauce behind the walls thing, and as part of the new relationship with CentOS, we're not handing them all that, so making it easier is a nice part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Okay, so regarding this, what's then the base for this? It's based on RPM, or what will be the process of
That's a great question. The question is this base still based on RPM, or is there something else that is the fundamental building block?
Yes, so we're still considering RPM as a foundation of base so far. If that changes in the future, that's perfectly fine. But so far, we have not seen any need to do something different. I mean, again, everybody is free to use a different concept to build also the base and then build on that. But the undertaking to actually do something radically different would mean, and I mean, I've been in the RPM and YAM world for actually quite a while. It's not as trivial as it sounds like, because just building software does not integrate software. And that's one of the key aspects that distribution does. So if you have, like Fedora does, and even base itself, if you have 150, just even 150 packages, they make a huge interdependency between each other. And if you're not really careful what you do there, you very quickly end up with either pieces that are outdated, that might have security flaws, or anything else where you don't really know what's inside the system. So there are a lot of key pieces in RPM and the technology around RPM that makes this easier. It's not to say that RPM is the only choice that enables you to do so, but you have to keep that in mind when you do something like this. I mean, throwing out make all stuff, making a tarball out of that, and then giving it to people, sure, that works. I mean, that's...
One of the things
it does.
I think Slackware is still around though.
Yeah. I mean, I started 20 years ago with Slackware, actually 22 years ago with Slackware.
So one of the things I think that's really cool about the RPM OS tree that Project Atomic is based on, I don't know if you know details of that, but basically it is kind of like a Git repository for your OS, and it works that way where you check out a certain version of the operating system. So instead of having the operating system being a collection of packages, this is the state of the system with all the different files in it, which is cool, but the particular neat thing about RPM OS tree is that tree is actually built out of RPM. So it's built out of the same building blocks, which is great. We have a lot of process for that and doing that reproducibly. And then also, like, you can actually run RPM verify on your system, and all that stuff, all the tools you're used to for that kind of thing still work, give or take things with timestamps, which don't work right now.
I think we should keep RPM as the Lego piece and just build the castles with it.
Yes, so the comment is we should keep RPM as the building piece and build castles out of it. But there.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to ask, with core being very, very small and having all these different layer 2 things going around it, it seems like we're going to have a lot of overlap in the layer 2 things that isn't part of core. So is that significant, or am I just wrong?
So the question is, with the base core being really small, it seems like in the areas outside of that, there's room for a lot of possible overlap.
Yeah.
And is that a problem, or are you just wrong?
Is it a problem?
Yes,
Is there a significant process that needs to go with that, or I mean just...
So, I would actually argue that there isn't any significant process there other than communication. Because if we've got 2 or 3 products that are all pulling in the same piece, maybe we communicate that to base and ask them to take it, or perhaps, in cases like in Fedora.21 we had some cases of firewall D, where 2 products wanted it but wanted different defaults, and 1 product didn't want it at all. And in those cases, we negotiated individual config defaults, and we made sure that we agreed on that we were all going to build the binary with the same set of flags and the same output, and then just agree to branch the configuration. So I think that more than anything is a communication problem, and I think it's not a bad problem to have, because now you actually have more eyes looking on it than just one.
So it almost seems like then once you have that overlap and you're going to try to have commonality there, that you almost have a second core.
Yeah, and actually in my original diagram from that, there's this proposal for something called Fedora Commons, which was supposed to be that idea. Apparently, although awesomely, there is a document management system called Fedora that there's trademark balance with, and after we solidly said we're Fedora, they went and renamed themselves Fedora Commons, so it would be not a bad idea
So
to use
we
that.
can't have a second common package as a trademark?
Trademark law aside,
Fedora shared or something?
Fedora shared, yeah.
Well, I mean,
maybe it's hard.
Langdon has a comment, and then Joe has his hand up.
So it's kind of 2 comments. One, like
2 comments, probably 3.
Well, first and foremost, like if there's complete overlap for one of the things, right? That would an argument be to move that to base, right? That would be one aspect.
So Langdon's first comment is there's complete overlap. There's argument to move it to base.
And then the other thing is that, I mean, at least as far as I was concerned, environments and stacks working group, this is one of the things they should be taking on, is like, how do we architect the kind of the shared components or not shared components, or kind of concepts like software collections or concepts like containerization so that each of the individual products aren't doing those themselves, right?
Yeah, so I think the second comment is that the Environments and Stacks working group is basically there to help figure out the solution to this problem using technologies like SCLs or containerization or whatever else. And actually, Docker makes a great example of this kind of thing, where we're using it as a core component for cloud, but we noticed that the other working groups were talking about wanting it, and so that got kicked around a little bit and fell down to the base saying, hey, we want that. That's clearly a core technology.
Yeah. I think that we shouldn't forget that there's a lot of benefits to have common base libraries even beyond the really core base. But all the libraries that are shared across desktop environments or between desktop and server and so on. To have them common and not to just abuse the ACL system to have 3 or 4 different versions, and every product uses their own version of the libraries, and then there are conflicts and single conflicts and...
Yeah, so Kevin's comment is that there's a huge benefit in having a shared package set that everybody uses. And we shouldn't just because we can, break things out into different versions and put them in SCLs for different libraries, like, oh, you wanted this version, and I wanted this version, so without talking to each other, putting them in different SCLs. I think I agree with that. We should have a good, if we need to do it because there's something intractable, we can maybe have the option, but it should not be the first choice, and that's kind of why we have the debate. That's why we structured it this way. There's a lot of benefits for less work for us, easier to maintain, easier for users, documentation, and so on. So I definitely agree. Joe, we're waiting on Joe. He was like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, so to rewind the conversation a little bit back to the part where we were talking about, RPMs will always be the base, yada, yada, yada.
So rewinding the conversation, the RPMs always being the base.
Is there any value in looking at, for Atomic we're using RPM OS tree, which derives from OS tree, which was, to build systems easily switch for, development, whatever. I'm seeing, or at least I'm perceiving, problems with packages like Vagrant being largely having trouble getting in because of our RPM packaging guidelines and figuring out ways to put things into neat little RPM packages. And I'm wondering if we have reached kind of that limit, because that's why we're doing Docker containers, and that's why we're doing all these other things, is because for many developers, we have hit the edge where RPMs are a blocker and don't benefit.
So the comments that Ruby is a terrible language and nobody should use it. That's not what Joe said. Let me paraphrase it correctly for the recording. Yeah, I'm the problem. Ruby and our model with do not go together very well, and so a lot of the it's not just Ruby. I'm not going to just blame Ruby. A lot of the language stacks in general. And Python is going more this way, and Python's always traditionally been one of the most distro-friendly languages. Do they still fit into the RPM model, and do we need to find a way to move beyond that?
Like essentially every language now has its own packaging. Yeah.
So essentially every language has its own packaging system, and those are getting more and more important.
If I can add to what Joe said, this is also reflective of a larger problem that we've had for many years in Fedora, which is the problem that ISVs can't find any value in working with Fedora because the time and energy that it takes to meet our guidelines to package for us reduce the benefit for getting into the distribution. That barrier is far too high for them, and it's why we've never really had interest, especially when the people who have the expertise in the package required to do the untangling and make all those fixes are typically the ISVs themselves. So that's not to say that there are not notable exceptions to that. There are. So for example, we've had people package collaborative suites and so forth for Fedora, and that has worked out. It is a tremendous amount of work for ISVs to find any value in working with us, though, and that barrier is going because the application is more and more the focus of the rest of the world outside our distribution project. It tends to more and more sideline us in any conversation about of those applications.
Just to paraphrase again, that was a lot to paraphrase. ISVs find it hard to package things in Fedora, and so we've never had really good success because it is so difficult to work in the way we want to work, and the work ends up flying them. And this is again what was in my talk that I skimmed by really fast. The reward, the equation for the benefit for that has gone. The reward has gone down and down. The perceived reward has gone down and down, and the benefit of doing it a different way has gone up and up. And so we're becoming less and less relevant to people doing applications. Stephen,
I don't think it's an either or. I think RPM has a massive and really important role to play, but that we have to acknowledge that it's not the only way. Yes.
Right.
The response is that it's not an either or. There's both of them have a role to play.
Yeah. So I'm really positive about this. I think with the rings model and stacks we have acknowledged that one size does not fit all in Fedora, and we've taken very positive steps to try to allow solutions there. With Docker, we have ways to isolate parts of an application stack which are not RPMized without throwing it away for your entire system. So I actually think we are making concrete steps to enable that kind of
the comment is that we are making concrete steps towards doing that with the rings model.
And
Kevin has a...
But we shouldn't forget that RPM is what supports, you said that we solved the distro problem, RPM is what solved it, and other systems for other distros like the D package which do the same thing. And the problem we solved is that it's automatically solved dependencies across the whole distribution. Everything can be updated in one place, and that's all things we lose if we use different package systems, even together with RPM. So everything should be in RPM. And if there are other package systems used, then we need to improve the conversion tools like sequence spec or the scripts that the cloud maintainers are using, so that we can put everything into RPMs more easily.
Kevin's comment is that I had said earlier that we'd solved the distro problem and that RPM and dpackage are what solved it, and that one of the big benefits is that that dependencies go across all the packages and all the different things. So if we have some things in RPM, some things in a different system, then we lose that benefit. And so having tools which put things into RPM, possibly completely transparently, you didn't say that, but the easier we make it to do that, just, you know, if you have a gem and it becomes an RPM, that's a way that you still have RPM as the base. So that's one possible way to do it. There are like 15 hands up here. I have no idea who's first. Ian's waving more something.
I would throw it back at you by way of giving a shout out to Copper, actually, because I don't even think RPM is necessarily exclusively the problem. It's our insistence on having a single, grand, unified, internally consistent set of RPMs that is the official one. And if you throw something in that doesn't match with that, Copper's made it nice to work outside of that, and it also supports the rings model.
Exactly.
Somebody mentioned that the GNOME
Goes to
project
balance.
actually did a Copper where they read the version in a way that would have been impossible midstream in F20, but it's still available.
So the response here is we're doing another thing that's awesome, which is the Copper system, which lets you have your own separate repository that might not actually fit into the grand model, but it lets you build it anyways, let people use it, and then kind of on their own.
So maybe to wrap this up and kind of get to another topic, which I'm sure somebody wants.
Slavic is waving around in
Oh, go Slavic!
I'm first. The way I'm looking at like RPM versus like package managers for languages like Python packages and Ruby gems is that developers don't want RPM, and it is a fact. And I'm not sure if we can change it, and I'm not sure if we should change it. So the way I'm looking at it is that we should sell RPM as great for sysadmins, great for deployment, great for stabilization and production stuff. But we should really not get into way of like language-specific like package managers, and we should really only integrate them well to work on Fedora, so that developers would like be able to easily work with Gem or Pip or whatever. So that we should just support developers to do this.
All right, so I'm going to try to paraphrase that a little bit, and it sounds to me like what we're saying is that there really are two target audiences here, and they have completely different requirements. We have developers whose requirements are, I want to get this up and running as fast as possible, I want to be able to iterate on it quickly, and I want to be able to work through my bugs. And then we have sysadmins who really want to be able to say, I want to get this up and running, and I want to know that it's going to stay there. And for developers, things like the Ruby gems and the PyPy packages and the
sysadmins also want to be able to put it back if something happens. They want to put the same. The sysadmins also, if something happens to it and disaster recovery, whatever, you want to be able to put the same thing back and know that there's infrastructure there for recreating it. Whereas if you're deploying from gems that are coming from the internet and like you might not ever be able to put the same thing back together again, that's very scary for a sysadmin.
So let me finish with that.
I lost my train of thought.
I actually thought you captured it, but I will definitely say, to all the RPM haters out there, right? Having done a lot of Microsoft development, RPM and that stuff is awesome, right? I mean, it is really, really, really nice to actually have a solid depth solver when you're trying to
For the camera, the reason we are clapping is we have a comment from the audience about how significantly better this is compared to the way that packaging is done on Microsoft products for the most part.
Or the old days.
violation of the code of conduct.
So, but no, just to end the comment, just that I think that there's this trade-off, right? And I think we've gotten to the point where we're not recognizing that we're making a trade-off. On the flip side, I am definitely in agreement with kind of the rings idea, right? Is, you know, and a lot of other distros have already solved have rings where there's different rules depending on kind of how far away you are from it being important. You know,
OpenSUSE is doing this right now.
Yeah, I think this is the point. We're kind of converging on the same thing, which is that RPM, the technology, is obviously solid. It's proven. It's repeatable. And there's no one here has any desire to drop that in any way, shape, or form for the foreseeable future. I think the point is this is the same thing 6 times. Yeah, the point is that, and it'd be great if we had the other 200 people in the room to make sure that people are carrying this message away here. Is that this is more an issue of policy going forward, where we are going to have to start learning to be more. I don't know what the word is. Like not tolerant, but I think the word is forward-looking and looking outward from our own view of the platform, and trying to incorporate that into how we do things from a policy standpoint.
Can we have a completely new topic?
Let's do that.
Somebody has a new topic for each of
Our last question.
Okay, over there.
I just wanted to make one comment. This is mostly new, which is to say that RPM is not fixed in time, and there's the possibility of making it better and making it easier to package.
Yeah. Like we do dependencies.
That is excellent, but not a new topic.
But it's true. Wait, repeat that for the camera.
Yeah, I mean, we do evolve RPM quite heavily right now. I mean, with SUSE, the guys are really working closely with them. We now have weak dependencies. There will be coming even like dependency language for stuff, doing really crazy things there. So. And then only if it's not RPM.
It's tough enough. Somebody else.
It's completely different.
Here, you guys had up since the very beginning.
Yeah, I have a topic. I was wondering about those graphs that you showed with the popularity of different distributions. I was wondering, is there a history of what we've done so far with Fedora that we can plot along this graph to see what worked and what didn't, and then build off of what we know?
So the comment is, we got this graph of that particular graph is Google Trends graph of Fedora, interest in Fedora, and it might be a good idea to look at what we've done in Fedora and see where, what's changed when. I guess that's a good idea, and I think we should do a lot more data collection and analysis in Fedora in general. It's one of the things I'd like to work on, and help London with that, by the way. I think it's hard because we changed so much stuff in Fedora. We went through a round of finger pointing when one of the Fedora 15 release, for whatever reason, our download statistics went for that release, and nobody really knows why. But yeah, was it GNOME 3? Was it Systemd? There was something else. Did we just do something wrong? Did somebody else do something wrong?
Did we change our statistics gathering?
Yeah, there's a bug in Mirror Manager. So
we change our logs.
Yeah, so we don't actually know because we changed. We can't do science because we changed too many things. So what I did.
Yeah, I strongly disagree with you. But I would propose to, I'm not sure, is it FESCO or the board, but why not a metrics working group that is about collecting data about what's going on in Fedora and whether or not it's making a difference?
Langdon proposes, he says that I'm wrong and we can't analyze things. I didn't say that we can't. I just say that it's hard from the data we have, and if we collect more data, we can. So the suggestion is making a metrics working group. I nominate Langdon to be the chair of that group. No, that's actually not true because I've already not nominated Langdon to be doing like 15 things.
Another thing that happened in Fedora 15 was that there was a historically low rate of laptop sales that time period too.
Yeah,
it was part of a really bad recession too. So people were just not getting new hardware, not trying new things at that same time.
And also there were lots of sunspots.
Yeah, exactly. Sunspots, laptop sales.
I just say treat it like a startup. I mean, this is a brand new thing, and
so
always the comment is that
draw conclusions from statistics. They are, look at the
but
pirates.
I don't think that we should let that stop us. And so the comment is treat it like a startup, and we should measure and see what we're doing on it. Wait, there's one. Yeah.
Yeah, not just a comment, but I think the statistics are really just lying, always.
So
it should not be really
lies, analyzing statistics.
But I had a question, and that's the first proposal way that each of the components will have a different timing in the releasing. Is it still in the plan?
Yeah, so the question is about do the components have different timing in their releasing? And the answer for right now is a definitive, we can't do that right now because we would break everything. And we're already kind of straining at the seams for release engineering and QA and other things. But a lot of these things, like for example, having the base be smaller and self-hosted. Self-hosted base really helps with that because if you're building the base with something moving at a different rate, you can never have that reproducibility. So it is something that I think we should remain open to in the future, but it's going to be a big process to get to there. And it's also, another question is whether there are other things we can do that give us the same result in a better way or in a different way. One of the common things is that I talked to a lot of people about Fedora and why they do or do not use Fedora. And one of the largest, I don't use Fedora because I can't, the life cycle is too short. That's way up there. And I think that if you dig into that, it's really not so much that the life cycle is too short, but that new releases are scary. And so if we can make it so that when we get to the end of one release, you can switch to the next release with confidence, and you'll know what's going to happen, you'll know what adjustments you need to make. Adjustments should be minimal if possible. So that it's smooth at least, then I think that that life cycle question is not so scary, but that's a lot of work too. But if we're going to choose between making the Fedora LTS and making Fedora awesome upgrades, that's where I put the resources.
Okay, so it's going to be 6 months.
Yes, the cycle is going to be. So we did this longer cycle, and as Kevin was saying earlier, the longer cycle is hard on everybody to do that. We've got a lot of benefit from it with QA improvements and infrastructure improvements. So I think I'm glad we did it this time, but it's hard, and I think the 6-month cycle has a lot of good benefits for what we're trying to do in Fedora.
Do you want to reach this goal?
So, probably time to start wrapping things up here because I'm even getting hungry, and I wasn't earlier. But we can definitely continue this conversation in the hallway tracks and everywhere else.